Well, let's kick that off officially. So hello everybody, I'm very pleased to be here to introduce the webinar today. So the official, the official title is Impact of Additive Manufacturing for the Surgical and Medical Device Supply Chain, and it's obviously a very important topic. So and a topic that's been to the front of the current situation. The pandemic has revealed both the needs and the capability to mobilize a lot of resources, but which leads to the need of structuring it better and being better prepared and better leveraging the capabilities in Australia, especially preparing for the future. And so we have the team who run this research today, and they'll probe into the future around what the supply chain could look like and the impact it will have for medical devices. And that's important for, I was about to say humanity, but it's the case, like it will improve our capacity to care and cure. But it's also important for Australia, who has to be at the forefront of these new technologies. So we haven't really started. So before we fully start, I wanted to do an acknowledgement of country. So UTS Business School respectfully acknowledges that our school is located on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. The Gadigal people have cared for their community, land and waters for thousands of generations based on their knowledge of their country. Aboriginal clan and nation across the country have been and are still connected to their land, water and spaces in this way. In these times when you are all located in different parts of the country, we begin by paying our respect to the ancestors and elders of the Aboriginal people on whose land you live and work. I acknowledge that their ongoing status as the first people of this land. So that was an important starting point. So again, before we really discuss the report, I wanted just to do a very brief presentation of the Centre for Business and Social Innovation, which is part of UTS Business School, but also has ramification and members across all the faculties. And so we have this, we tend to think a bit original positioning, which is really bringing together all the elements of innovation, which is some that are along productivity, competitiveness, but also social justice, environment responsibility, and basically, innovation as a strength of progress, which is very much illustrated by the report today, improving the delivery and the way we conduct medical research and manufacturing in the medical field is very important for the future. So as such, it fits really well in one of our three streams that are represented to the right, would be the future of innovation, innovative systems. And the members of the team that produced the report have been involved in a wide range of projects, some of which are very centered on supply chain, but others that are more around other aspects of additive manufacturing, or more precise aspects of the consequences and the use of medical devices that are produced in different conditions. Just for as something to note, we have two other streams, one on the future of organization in society, which is really around broader aspects on sustainability, whether it's social or environmental, and then one of the future of work, organizing and enterprise. See how innovation can be applied much more broadly to the way we work and the way we organize. There we go. That was the the little adverts that you had to listen to before we start with the real topic. So I hand over to the specialist of the day. Who was yes, Moira.
Yeah, thanks, Emmanuel, for that introduction. So what I'm going to do today is present the research, the structure of the research and the findings, or the team and I will do that together. But before that, I'd like to just go through and just some of the Zoom webinar protocols. If everyone can keep their microphones and video muted, certainly while we're doing the presentation. That will aid us, with bandwidth, etc. We will have a question and answer. So when we get to the question and answer session, we will actually invite people to speak. So if you want to speak, you can either select the Q&A icon, which you'll find on one of the menus, or alternatively, you can put your question in the chat function, and Katie will be moderating the session. We'll invite you to speak, then you can free your microphone, and we can begin the discussion using that technology. So to get started, what I'd like to do is, first of all, thank the Association for Supply Chain Management. They actually funded this research. We went into a competitive grant and we were fortunate enough to get that. So we're very fortunate for the funding that we received from them. We would also like to acknowledge John Croft from the Additive Manufacturing Hub, who is obviously a supporter of not just this presentation, but more broadly, any of the initiatives that are going on within additive manufacturing, and also Amtel, who obviously play a significant role in this space. But let's get started. We'll go through, first of all, I'll introduce the team. Maruf provided significant leadership in the research, particularly around the methodology, making sure that what we did, both from a quantitative and qualitative stance, had robustness. I played a role of one of the lead, researchers, where we were able to pull together the method, the supply chain methodologies and structures, and made sure that we aligned the research for relevance to the supply chain, the supply chain. Katrina played a significant role, particularly in the data collection and assisting with project management of the research. Jennifer and James provided expertise around the additive manufacturing. They weren't able to be here today, and we're fortunate enough to have Joanne here with us today, who will talk a little bit about the 3D printing and additive manufacturing in this space, and also will join us on the panel. So thank you for that. So to get started, we've got a fairly well-structured process to make sure that we can finish on time, but we will first of all go over the 3D printing overview and the score model, and how we related the research to the score model, which was important because we wanted to make sure that the research that we did had relevance to the supply chain participants, as well as people in the health sector. Maruf will talk about the research approach. We'll go through, Katrina will present the key findings. As COVID happened, we were also fortunate enough to be able to pull together some case studies to be able to share with you today. We'll talk about the call to action and the next steps that we'll are planning before we take some questions and answers. So from there, I'll hand over to Katrina, who will do a brief overview of 3D printing. And then I think Joanne can talk specifically about the printing for the medical and surgical device sector. So over to you, Katrina.
It's Joanne, actually. Off you go, Jo.
Thank you. Thanks, Moira. So I'm just going to present a couple of slides about 3D printing and how 3D printing is being used in the medical devices industry. So if we think first about conventional manufacturing methods, these tend to start with a solid material. They are subtractive processes. We remove material to make a product, or we create a mold from those materials, which creates the product. And particularly with the tool in the molding process is very costly, and therefore we need to create economies of scale by producing large numbers of products at one time. In contrast, we've got additive manufacturing, or 3D printing, which basically starts from a design and produces a product by adding layer upon layer of material. And this process offers a number of advantages and a number of opportunities, particularly in the medical device industry. There's no need for tooling. You can manufacture one-off items that you can't manufacture through conventional means of manufacturing. And you can also assemble products within a single print, again, not possible with conventional manufacturing methods. And I think what 3D printing offers to the medical device sector is largely around, at the moment, around patient-specific designs. It allows us to use patient information to create devices specifically for them. And these have been largely in the space of bone regeneration, bone implants for patients with large tumours, and also in the maxillofacial surgical applications. And this is an example of a bone scaffold that's been designed using AI specifically for regeneration. It's also used quite a lot in terms of surgical guides for planning operations. It's been used very successfully for improving the outcomes of total knee replacements. And also there's an opportunity to train the next generation of surgical trainees. It's being used in the mainstream a little bit more, and there are some knee components that are 3D printed, and also there are spinal fusion cages that are 3D printed. But the need for post-processing of surfaces at the moment limits its use as a bearing surface, as in a total hip replacement bearing device. And I think in order to make this technology more accessible and more widely used, there needs to be some changes, which we'll talk about a bit more later on, in terms of changing the culture and encouraging collaboration between all the different stakeholders within the ecosystem. And I'm going to leave it there for now.
Okay, thanks, Joanne. So the work that the team initially undertook involved us identifying the key challenges and opportunities for the medical device development industries, but we wanted to very much take a supply chain lens. So we weren't necessarily, we weren't focused on the clinical outcomes. What we were focused on was, how do we go from demand and demand generation to actually delivery of the product. So with these challenges and opportunities and the corresponding strategies, I won't go through each of them here because they're available in the report, and Katrina will touch on them as she goes through the findings. However, with the extensive list that came out of this literature review, both of academic literature and practitioner literature, we validated the list through a series of semi-structured interviews with practitioners and other supply chain practitioners and academics. The list was consolidated to a list of 10, and we used those 10 to actually go through and use that as the basis for the research. But what we did, which was of interest, was we aligned these challenges and opportunities and strategies to the 5 level 1 processes of the SCORE model, which of course are plan, source, make, deliver and return. There was one key omission that stood out in this process, and that is the supply chain sector, or the supply chain SCORE model has treated additive manufacturing as what we refer to as an engineer to order. And we think that this needs to be challenged. But we did also consider the enablers and the performance metrics, which are both critical components of the SCORE model, and areas that are lacking and certainly need work as we move forward. But first, this engineer to order, there was not enough focus on the importance of the design in the customization of additive manufacturing for surgical and medical devices. actually it was unclear whether the design phase should be part of the planning process or part of the production process. And this would very much depend on who executes the design and whether it's designers specialising in the design of body parts, or whether it was clinicians adding design and incorporating the design service into their service offerings. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that area. The second thing that came out of the initial literature review was the importance of enablers, those processes that prepare, support and handle information exchanges and relationships that are linked to current and planned demand. So again, this was lacking, and I think Katrina will talk more about that as being a high priority in the findings. The third thing that came out of the literature was the need for data and performance metrics that provides evidence to support the optimal design of the supply chain, whether it should be centralised, decentralised, or in location printing facilities, which was the more appropriate network design, and again an area that as supply chain researchers we're keen to explore more. But now I'll hand over to Maruf, who'll talk a little bit more about the research approach and the methodology. Over to you, Maruf.
Thanks, Moira. Hi, this is Maruf, and in this slide, I will be presenting research method that applied for this research. In this research, in line with research objectives, we used both qualitative and quantitative research method, that is mixed method research, because mixed method research improves reliability and validity of research findings. In qualitative method as an approach, we used field study to identify context-specific challenges, opportunities, and corresponding strategies. For data collection, we used semi-structured interview from 10 respondents comprised of suppliers, manufacturers, and users of additive manufacturing-based products in clinical settings. For qualitative data analysis, we used content analysis technique. As an outcome of qualitative data analysis, we developed a list of challenges, opportunities, and strategies which are compared with the findings from literature review. As Moira mentioned, the findings from literature review, then the findings from literature review were compared with the findings from interview findings. In quantitative method, as an approach, we used survey research. For data collection, we used a structured questionnaire which was administered to workshop participants, 12 workshop participants. For quantitative data analysis, we used multi-criteria decision making, that is MCDM matrix, and quality function deployment, that is QFD matrix. MCDM matrix was used for prioritizing and determining importance weights of challenges and opportunities. And the main quantitative tool that used for this research is QFD matrix. And it was used for identifying most important strategies to avail opportunities and mitigate challenges. An outcome of quantitative study, as an outcome of quantitative data analysis, we identified the most important challenges, opportunities, as well as corresponding strategies to mitigate challenges and avail opportunities. In this slide, I will be presenting quality function deployment, that is QFD model that is used in this research. QFD is a powerful tool to address strategic and operational decisions in business. Application of QFD is very wide as it is applied to different fields for identifying opportunities, solving problems and mitigating risk, and many others. Further, QFD provides a means of translating business problems and opportunities into suitable strategies to reach specific goals. Operationalization of QFD model. In QFD model, business problems, opportunities are referred to as what's, and how to solve problems or avail opportunities are referred to as how's, as shown in figure number 1 at the right-hand side. In this study, challenges and opportunities of surgical and medical device supply chain are what's, and strategies to mitigate challenges or avail opportunities are how's. Next. In this slide, I will explain QFD matrix with calculations. In our QFD matrix, as presented in the figure, surgical and medical device supply chain challenges are presented in the first column from the left of the matrix. The second column from the left presents the importance weights of challenges, which is derived from multi-criteria decision-making matrix, MCDM matrix. We find that challenge number 3, 4, 5, and 8 have the highest importance weight. That means most important challenges are identified through MCDM. The first row at the top of the matrix present strategies to overcome challenges. The numerical value at the middle of the matrix, the main body, yes, presents relationship between challenges and strategies. The last two rows of the matrix present relative importance and absolute importance values of the strategies. That means which strategies will be more important and which are less important can be determined from relative importance and absolute importance values. From relative importance values, we find that strategy 2, 3, and 4 have the highest relative importance. It means that these three strategies should be implemented on a prioritized basis. And most of the cases we have resource shortages, so we need to prioritize which strategies should be implemented on a priority basis. Similarly, we design QFD matrix 2 for opportunities and corresponding strategies. The one that we presented is relating to challenges and corresponding strategies. And in our report, we have opportunities, prioritized opportunities, and then corresponding strategies to avail those opportunities. Now I'm handing over to Katrina.
Thanks, Maruf. Okay, so what did we find within our study? What did we find within our research? So importantly, when we focus on what we found around the top ranked challenges and strategies, we identified that there was approximately a top 10 that focused on the gaps within this ecosystem circle that you see on the screen. So when I say ecosystem, what I'm talking about is that we can group and frame the challenges and strategies in 3 areas. And one of those is the people in the ecosystem. So it's really around looking at where the networks are, where the expertise is, and of those elements of the ecosystem. The technology in the ecosystem, so really mobilizing the technical, the infrastructure, the physical attributes of that whole ecosystem. And then the process. So it's really bringing those 2, people, technology, together to develop solutions in the ecosystem. So how do we connect all those together is the main challenge. And this is where the bulk of the challenges and strategies lie that we found in the research project. So 4 challenges were really top in terms of the QFD that Maruf just outlined in terms of that scoring matrix. We found 4 top ones as part of the research in terms of the implementation. So really the top one was the need to build and gather evidence across the whole ecosystem. This is by the manufacturer or the medical and surgical facility or the health professional. Where is the evidence coming from and how are we building it? So that's the need for evidence that patient-specific 3D printing techniques do provide product viability, quality, process improvement, and cost to actually justify using 3D printing and the investment in 3D printing. And also importantly, the need to gather evidence to show the benefits of 3D printing versus subtractive manufacturing to really deliver on that personalized health outcome, particularly within our current regulatory and health insurance environments where we see a lot of the challenges in gathering the evidence, presenting the evidence, and how we actually go about doing that in the medical sphere. Secondly, if you look at the other blue circle here, we've got building the business case was ranked as the 2nd highest challenge. So as patients demand new and best-in-class technology, The need to keep supply costs down while providing more and better quality care is going to continue to be a competing priority. For businesses across the supply chain, we found that exploring the potential investment in 3D printing or downstream processes and developing that clear return on investment for their business to invest in 3D printing versus subtractive manufacturing is challenging. So how do we develop that business case? Where are the examples across the ecosystem that businesses can draw upon? And for hospitals and the health system, the business case to invest in 3D printing technology at point of care or within the hospital itself, they are limited. So there's limited opportunities to share this information across the health networks in the system within Australia. And thirdly, we look at a lack of knowledge within the health system. And I was talking to John Croft earlier, who's on the call, and really around how we find out about the knowledge of 3D printing standards and quality processes, which can create barriers to consider the technology for medical and surgical procedures. So as we know, 3D printing suits production of low volume and one-off patient-specific medical designs. But currently hospitals and physicians approach design and quality and procedures very differently. So this limits the opportunity to scale or really look at a mass customized approach to really bring in 3D printing in its entirety. And then if we look at the fourth top key challenge, we look at the limited social or soft skills or soft people capabilities is a fourth key challenge. So on the supply side, with new technology development comes a need for new knowledge and skills. And currently in Australia, as we found out in the research, we have limited capability and skills, particularly in printing and material technology to meet increasing demand needs for speed in production of medical devices. But also we have limited capability in post-processing that Joanne referred to at the beginning, such as heat treatment, sterilisation, clean and pack processes, which is leading to either a monopoly situation with large companies or the need we completely offshore these processes. And then on the demand side, there's limited awareness in the health sector of the potential for 3D printing. So there's a mismatch between industry talking to the health professionals and health professionals actually networking with industry, and how do we get that cross collaboration? So there's a big limitation there. Then when we look at strategies to avail some of these challenges here, the report goes into more depth in the challenges, which will provide you with a link at the end. But you can see here that from the initial findings, the main strategies are really how do we connect all these pieces of the puzzle together to connect the ecosystem, and how do we share that knowledge? So we need to develop strategies around connecting all these players, particularly across the health and the manufacturing sector, to share that knowledge. Then also by standardizing the 3D process, in some aspects for clinicians, supply chain stakeholders will have the opportunity to provide these consistent customer value and to really network these ideas. If we can look at standard processes or something similar where we start to really standardize this conversation. And for technical development, obviously it's a matter of time where we start to improve speed, the process of machines and the quality of 3D printing production for medical and surgical sectors. But investment and policy direction and these types of conversations that we're having today will help this, and how do we take this forward. So you'll see in the report link that we give you at the end of the session, a lot of these key findings, we go into a lot more detail in the report, and you can have a look at these and really see where the key challenges have come out. So when we look at the top, analysing the top ranked opportunities, we see again that they can be framed within that ecosystem of people, technology and process. And we identified about 3 top priorities here for opportunities in the medical surgical supply chain. A large opportunity that 3D printing offers, as many of you know, is that of personalised treatment. So 3D printing is able to accommodate complex geometries compared to subtractive manufacturing, and then thus offers a more patient-specific experience and ultimately an improved patient outcome, which is a positive for the industry, the regulatory bodies, health insurers, patient outcome, and across that whole value chain. Secondly, the 3D printing presents flexible design opportunities and the use of digital and computer modelling to really find that right patient fit. And then in alignment to that is the use of 3D printing for rapid learning as a training tool or education tool for future surgeons and practitioners, engineers. So when we look at younger scientists or practitioners coming through the system from an education perspective and the hospital perspective, they can start to use 3D printing for learning and really push the boundaries in that medical and surgical fields. So within the ecosystem framework, the main strategies to avail these opportunities, as you can see, we've got these dark blue circles, which are the strategy areas, and the light blue circles, which are the key opportunity areas. But you can see how large this first collaboration strategy is. And that came out very strongly in all the stakeholders we spoke to and the literature around the need in Australia to increase collaboration across the sector will start to address some of these opportunities. What we found is that the sector in Australia is very fragmented. Advice, information, expertise is really hard to access, and the industry are really unsure of how to build networks in the medical ecosystem, and vice versa. How do surgeons, practitioners, clinicians, radiologists access the expertise across our industry who do have a lot of the solutions to some of these opportunities and challenges. So when we look at technology improvements, digitisation will facilitate this improved clinical decision support and enable health systems to really design scalable, repeatable processes and workflows that optimise this care delivery. And as technology improves, 3D printing will start to lower the cost of goods sold and improve the capacity to produce mass customised product and obviously improve those patient outcomes. And finally, a key strategy will be to really build this industry capability and this education across our university system and our short course system, and how we build that technical capability in machine operation, materials development, post-processing applications is going to be essential as we move this sector forward. And building that social capability across networks of stakeholders will build that knowledge, awareness, and understanding of the impacts of 3D printing. So again, in the report, you'll find a large section on the opportunities and how the correlated strategies relate to those different opportunities and the level of importance of those. So there's a lot more information in that section. As Moira said at the beginning, what we'd like to do briefly before we close and come to Q&A is present 3 case studies that demonstrate how 3D printing has impacted the medical and surgical supply chain during the coronavirus pandemic. So it was quite timely that we were able to collate some of these and put them in the report that were presented to the funder as well. So firstly, one of the case studies we looked at was 3D printing innovation in a company called Isanova. So COVID-19 has been a game changer for 3D printing, as many on the call know and have probably been involved in. Whereas the traditional manufacturing technologies that we described earlier at the beginning of the presentation really struggle to respond to the urgent changing needs of countries around the world for medical supplies, 3D printing has been flexible and it doesn't require new tooling to be made to manufacture products. So as an example, early in March, this company Isanova in Italy collaborated with a local hospital to produce an emergency CPAP mask that could be supplied through established global supply chain links. A CPAP mask is attached to a ventilator and helps COVID-19 patients to breathe. So on the right, you'll see it's more like a snorkeling mask from a sporting goods store. And this was obtained from the store Decathlon. And when combined with a 3D printing valve, the yellow part at the bottom right hand of the screen, it only costs about $1 to produce on a cheap desktop 3D printer to solve this problem. So with the entire process from initial meeting with the hospital through to the use of the CPAP mask by the first patient, only taking 3 days. So over the last 5 years in particular, cheap desktop 3D printers like these that have been used by Isanova have really infiltrated manufacturing facilities, schools, universities and homes, making them widely accessible and obviously readily available during the COVID-19. So beyond the immediate benefit to patients, this case study really highlights the issues for businesses to consider. So firstly, while Isanova patented their valve design, they then gave this design away for free online so that others in need around the world could really benefit. And the file can be found in many locations online and downloaded by anyone for 3D printing, just like opening up your favorite music store and downloading a song. Secondly, the speed to market meant that the normal pathway to medical device manufacture was bypassed. The mask is not certified by regulatory bodies like the FDA. However, this highlights a decentralized way for businesses to really use 3D printing and respond to needs in real time. Obviously, I think we need to do further research in relation to regulation, as we identified in this project that we documented millions of products around the world that were 3D printed, and it's clear that this technology can play a critical role in meeting medical products in lieu of using traditional technologies. A second case study that we looked at was really looking at how 3D printing was applied by a company called Speed 3D here in Australia, looking at how they innovated their business model, and an interesting opportunity here. So when we think about business model innovation, businesses really ask themselves several questions. So they think about who their customer is, what do they want to offer this customer, how do they want to create value for that customer, and how will that value be sustained? How will that business continue to make money from that particular innovation or that particular product? So what Speed 3D did was they really questioned, as during the COVID-19, who this customer could be, who was their customer, and thinking about that and what technology could be applied. So they thought about the range of customers across schools, hospitals, ships, shopping centres, the different people that go into these areas, and these are the customers, and what could be provided from a global perspective to address the coronavirus pandemic. So what could be applied to all these customers? They decided and thought about coming up with an actual coating solution that was 3D printed, so using copper as a 3D printing coating solution. And to look at all these customers and look at this whole surface protection, they coated doorknobs and touch plates with this antimicrobial copper solution, which is actually effective for 99% after 5 hours versus 72 hours with a stainless steel or plastic surface. So it just shows, by looking at this customer, what they could actually produce and how they could do it to service a range of different customers with the one 3D printed product. And when you look at the ongoing viability of something like this, and as a business model transformation, this actual product can be applied to other viruses and bacteria that can be transmitted via touch. So by assessing these 4 questions and really looking at where the value could be lied, they could use 3D printing and really look at how their business model could be transformed for a viable business. So I'll just hand over to Moira. We've got a third case study to present, quite a local one as well. So I'll let Moira explain that to you. Moira, you're on mute.
Sorry, so the case study that I'm going to present today is comes from a small beach town on the mid-north coast of New South Wales, a place called Woolgoolga. It's halfway between Sydney and Brisbane. And tourism, human services and agriculture, specifically blueberries, are the staple industries for the area. But interesting, because when the COVID pandemic hit and everything went into shutdown, you know, dentists were not allowed to see patients. So there was actually a very entrepreneurial dentist in Woolgoolga who taught himself how to design the PPE equipment, the personal protective equipment, and he began to use the 3D printer that he normally uses in his dental practice to begin to print these PPE equipment. Well, once you know, word got out, he started getting demand from all over the place, not just locally, but much further afield. And he was actually getting so much demand that he invested in a different type of printer, and he used a different filament, and he was able to increase his production from around producing 9 of them per day to now being able to produce you know, hundreds per day, and he's also now looking at expanding that further into doing FDA approved you know, test kits as well. So what we have here is a small location that's not necessarily suited to traditional manufacturing, but is able to introduce a you know, manufacturing as a viable as a viable solution or industry into their area. But the four key things that came out of this, in my mind, was the speed at which he was able to pivot his resources from producing one product to another. The second thing was the nature of the distributed manufacturing, the fact that we have a location that was traditionally not considered to be suitable for manufacturing, now has these sort of specialty manufacturing capabilities through 3D printing. The third thing was the importance of knowing where these printing facilities are. So, had we been more advanced and we were aware of, and we are aware of where 3D printing facilities are, in emergencies, we should be in a good position to actually mobilise those resources, both the printing capabilities, the designs and the manufacturing. So just in terms of consolidating our understanding of where these resources are, I think is an important thing going forward for the industry and its growth. And the last thing was the enabling and sharing of skills across industry. So here's a guy who's a dentist, but actually he was able to use his skills in one industry to come through and help, in a different context. So that, sort of cross collaboration and sharing of skills, I think this case study actually shows that. But as far as the implications go, we tried to bring together all of the different sort of ideas that were happening, and we initially looked at the change management iceberg, saying, well, we actually have a change management issue here. But when we began to look more closely, we weren't just talking about change. So we began to draw the analogy of not the iceberg, but the analogy that we have here is in fact like a volcano. We have the 3D printing and this tremendous opportunity bubbling underneath the surface, but we actually need these layers that sit on top of the opportunity to be able to enable the opportunity to be realised and actually come out into the open. So the first thing that we understand is that we do need collaboration. We do need collaboration to happen through industry bodies, such as the ASCM, the Additive Manufacturing Hub, Sphere. We need people that can bring these people together. We also need collaboration, but we need specific projects that we can collaborate on. So we need to understand, where the collaboration needs to happen. For example, as I mentioned earlier, design. We need to talk about where should design fit? Should it be coming from designers? Should it be coming from, product engineers? Should it be coming from, clinicians as an added service? Evidence building, not just evidence building in the clinical sense, but evidence building in the supply chain sense. How do we mobilise the resources? How were new supply chains being able to come together very quickly? So there's a whole lot of supply chain and business evidence that needs to come to the forefront. Of course, business case development, understanding, the costs, the returns, and, a lot of the things that are going to underpin investment. And once we begin to get these layers together, we also need to recognise how they fit together to achieve successful implementation. So we thought that the volcano was in fact a good analogy for that. But moving forward, the next steps that we have is we will be, and we're committed to working with practitioners, and we've got some practitioners that have come forward to help us develop these business and use case studies. So we're certainly committed to doing that. We've also planning for a forum in March or April, and specifically looking at where we can get some industry and university support together to apply for some research fundings. And we'd certainly also be interested in other calls to actions or people here today, if you've got any ideas on next steps as well. but we're certainly committed to moving this process forward. So over now, Emmanuel will talk about the Q&A session.
Yeah, well, thank you to all presenters. I think that's really a very important report, and the quality of the research really shows where the progress should happen, the gap in capabilities, the need of better collaboration and coordination, and I hope there'll be a lot of suggestions and questions on how we can make that happen. I think we're now adding John Croft to the panel to contribute to the discussion, and once we have done that, we can open for questions, and Katie will present the question, and then we'll direct to the best panel member to answer.
I believe we have now.
Go, Katie.
John, over to you.
All right, great. I just wanted to make sure it was me. Thanks, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity of having a talk here. Someone's going to have to pull the hook out at some stage, because, as you know, I'm a talker, so I'll just keep going. So I'll wait for that hook to enter from the side. I suppose just a little bit about the hub. The hub was started back in late 2018 from a state government funding from the Vic government, noting that additive manufacturing was definitely coming to the forefront with the manufacturing industry. So they thought, no, we need to get it out there and start a place where people can come to and sort of start to understand about additive manufacturing. We are, I call us a facilitator or the catalyst, trying to bring together the service providers, the technology providers, the research institutes such as UTS and the like. I mean, after 11 years at Bosch and working with institutions and industry in Europe, it works so well. It's got to work really well here, and I see the changes actually happening. So with what we're trying to do with the likes of UTS and the other universities is have our members or the additive or people that are looking at additive to understand what each of the universities, where they're researching, where they're working, so that they can start to collaborate with the right university and in further research in what they're doing. So we're the catalyst, and we're trying to also bring together government mechanisms such as funding, which, as some of you may know, we've got the Build It Better voucher in Melbourne, which is unfortunately only for Victoria because it's Victorian money that they're throwing at it. But that has been a huge success. And I mean, the success around it, we have currently 35 projects on the go. And I think by the end of it, there'll be about 44 projects. Out of those, there's probably been about 6 to 8 projects around medical devices and also around COVID, because it's amazing what happened and the response that people had in COVID. I mean,
So John, I'm just wondering, if you were to say the 3 things that came out that comes from your hub as to be the most important things, you know, that you're getting from your members, what would you say the 3 most important things are to you know, for us to be able to move forward?
I think, well, what we're hearing from the members is the hurdles of adoption. You know, that we all know there's some huge hurdles there. I mean, we're still in the early phases of additive, and it's changing on a daily basis. I think some of the major hurdles, of course, is, and especially if we're talking about the medical industry, is the lack of standards and around what we're doing in medical devices. FDA approvals. We've got large companies which are now really pushing in the additive field. I mean, Anatomics being a major one. So we need to look at that around the additive manufacturing processes and around the materials that are also being used. The other major one I see is the education. And listen, we can talk about all industries, not just medical, but I can see from this point of view and around this webinar, the education of clinicians, surgeons, healthcare professionals is really mandatory now so that they have a much better understanding of what additive can bring and what it's doing, not just here in Australia, but globally as well. The other thing, yes,
so John, do you see that as embedding, embedding knowledge in just for the I guess the new people coming through, or do you see that as looking at upskilling existing staff, like short courses? Or
yeah, both, Moira, both.
Okay.
Definitely, and I think you'll have to agree, and I know I was talking to Katrina earlier, that one of the biggest problems and one of the things around what the hub has been trying to do, and we know that universities are offering wonderful engineering courses and that, where additive forms a portion. And the problem I see with the adoption of additive and what I hear out there is, well, it's all really great. We can put someone on and have them quickly trained by the technology provider, but we need skill sets. We don't have it. And that can be a problem. So one of the things that the hub has now been trying to do is to bring to the community online training that's at least recognised, but short courses, get them started, get the interest flowing so we can move into the bigger courses as we move forward.
Okay, all right, so maybe I'd like to see if we can get Joanne to talk a little bit about, Sphere and how the innovation, what you're doing there to bring the innovation ecosystem together.
Yeah, could I just finish on one thing, Moira?
Sure.
Is that you brought, during the case studies, you brought about the valve with the decathlon mask.
Yep.
I'll say now that a Victorian company started this way back in February.
Yep.
They brought out and did testing with Sunshine Hospital.
Yep.
That was Cobalt Design and Go Proto actually got together on this, where they actually designed a special valve system that plugs into every oxygen outlet, which turned the outlet into a low to mid-range respirator without having respirators. So it was that call of action with the COVID that actually helped promote that.
So it's important that we really look to consolidate these case studies. And I think, I know that we've got a project here at the moment looking to do that. Now, Joanne, do you mind to just talk a little bit about the ecosystem, and then Katie can invite some of these other people asking questions?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Moira. So from where I sit as one of the leaders of the Frontiers Technology Clinical Academic Group, which is part of the Sphere Sydney Partnerships for Health, Education, Research and Enterprise, what we're doing there is we're trying to create this connected ecosystem for innovation. And what I'm seeing here, all the problems and all the barriers and the issues, they're not just pertinent to the 3D printing sphere, that they're kind of forefront of our minds, and perhaps there's some additional challenges, but many of the issues around, we've got questions about funding, we've got questions about schemes, government schemes, the ecosystem, the disconnect between engineers, scientists, clinicians, healthcare workers, healthcare managers, industry. This is not just a problem within the 3D printing environment. It is a problem across Sydney in particular, for any medical device innovation or innovation in general. So what Sphere is hoping to do is to provide a platform to bring those people together, particularly clinicians, into the mix early on, to make sure that we're addressing unmet clinical need, with industry, with the scientists and the technologists, and all to work together. But there's also, you know, Alfredo's posted a question about regulation. You know, there's the lack of a clear pathway, but there's also a lack of understanding of, you know, the whole translation process. And we, part of one of the E's in Sphere is about education. So acting as a trusted place to go for advice and to be connected with experts, you know, helping to bring people together by running events. So we're only very, very small, and we can only do so much. So I think this is just part of the solution, but it's at least it's a start in trying to bring people together. Yeah. And we do have funding, seed funding, and there are other pots of money as well. But I think at the moment it's also fragmented, that we need to be able to bring all of that information together to enable the whole ecosystem to, you know, to move this along, really.
So Katie, have you got any questions there that you can direct to some of the panelists?
So the first one I'm going to start with is actually one from John Canning, and he shared a link to an article that was some local university responses, rapid responses for 3D printing. And what he'd like to know is, how can UTS lead these activities? So the response he shared is actually from USID, but I'd like to know how UTS could be leading this.
Yeah, so I guess, you know, one of the things that I see is aggregating either, well, case studies, aggregating demand, the designs, aggregating, you know, where the resources are, to a scale that we can show that there's substance in the sector. So, you know, as, you know, whilst we're all off doing these things in a fragmented way, and everyone's doing, you know, such great things, but I think the key is, you know, from our research is the case studies, and we need to be able to get case studies across a whole range of different things, both that are going to have clinical outcomes, but also these business case studies, consolidation of where the printers are, so that if we do need to mobilise resources quickly, we know exactly where they are, and understanding where the existing resources are may in fact enable us to do some network design, to be able to put forward cases for better positioning geographically where some of these additional manufacturing hubs can belong, and of course getting together the 3D designs to make them more accessible, either paid or unpaid. So I think from that perspective, they would be the three areas that we should be looking to move on. So I hope that's answered your question, John.
Yep. Yep.
So I think the next question is probably more directed at John Croft from the industry perspective. But we've had a question from Robin, who works from the industry development team with the New South Wales Treasury.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to know, how do you see the Australian Government Modern Manufacturing Initiative and National Manufacturing Priorities as an opportunity for scaling additive manufacturing of medical products? For example, what is the shared infrastructure that is needed for this scale?
Good question. I mean, what we've been talking to state governments about, of course, is simply what we've been running out of Victoria with the BIB voucher system and how successful that has been. And we believe it is a way of promoting additive throughout the manufacturing communities right around Australia. As you know, I'm not interested in Victoria, New South, Queensland, any of them. I'm interested in Australian manufacturing. That's my whole purpose, and that's the whole purpose of what Antil and the Hub is about as well. It's looking at manufacturing as a national pastime as such. So to me, what I would like to see is, you know, I haven't had a good opportunity to read exactly where all the funding that our federal government has indicated that they're going to put into manufacturing, the 1.5 billion, and how much of that is set aside to look into the additive community or into additive manufacturing, as it's becoming more and more heavily involved in the defence area, in the aerospace area, and growing, of course, in the medical area. I mean, we're seeing printed stents and all the rest of it, and we're seeing clinician guides, you know, where surgeons can get product to plan what they're going to do in surgeries. So, you know, if the governments can come together and put some funding or seed funding, however way you'd like to look at it, Robin, happy to talk about it in more depth, but to put together something, programs either in New South or in the other states, or a national program out there to try and fund industry to start to engage in additive manufacturing. And where that can be right down to research. They might be looking at new product or new process, and they need to do further research with some of our institutions, UTS, RMITs, Griffith Uni, University, Flinders Uni. It doesn't matter where it is, but what they're physically doing as far as the research is that these people can get in touch direct with someone who's working in the area that they're wanting to work in or develop a product in.
Moira, would you like to say more from the UTS perspective?
Yeah, so I think from our perspective, understanding the landscape and understanding from the bottom up how the different organisations play, both some at a local level, some at a national level, some at a global level. So I think sometimes we look at things on an equal plane, and in fact it's multi-layer. So being able to have some, I guess some funding to put together what the landscape looks like, and then we'll get a better idea of how things flow through that landscape. And a lot of it is mapping. You don't go into new terrain without having a map to understand what you're navigating through. And at the moment there is no map. From my perspective, and I guess from a certainly UTS supply chain management perspective, is understanding that landscape and that terrain that we all have to navigate through is probably the first start to being able to get everyone together.
Thanks, Moira. So we actually have a question now from one of our panelists, Katrina, who'd like to ask a question to Joanne.
Thanks, Katie. Well, to Joanne and any of the other participants, really, and it comes back to what Alfredo raised on the chat as well. As we presented in the research, we've got a multitude of stakeholders, from hospitals, busy clinicians doing surgery, radiologists, nursing staff, together with small to medium enterprises wanting to get into 3D printing and find out who they can access. How, if we could start with using Sphere as a pilot to really start to bring some of these players together, but how do we do that with competing priorities? And I'm just wondering if you thought about how we can start to really take some action there and bring some of these players together, and also involving TGA in those collaborations as well, all the relevant bodies, so that we can start to tackle some of these challenges head on.
So I'll answer for the Sphere aspect, about the Sphere aspect. So it is part of Sphere's initiative to bring together clinicians, industry and academics. And you hit the nail on the head there, Katrina. It's not easy. Clinicians are time poor. They have great ideas. They often don't know how to action and where to go to get the information to help them do that. So that's part of Sphere's role. Our Frontiers Technology Clinical Academic Group is also partnering with a new platform in Sphere called Health Hatchery, which is the innovation platform within Sphere. And that is really working closely with clinicians and having clinician experts to go and spread the word in the community, and that's to make sure that we're addressing real problems, unmet clinical needs, not just something that we've dreamed up as academics that may not have relevance in the real world. It's actually products that clinicians need, and they need now. So 3D printing and additive manufacture, you know, could be part of this. We run workshops, we run educational events, we run networking events, so we run seed fund calls. You know, it's just about talking to the right people, and perhaps, you know, having an event around this and inviting the right people to come along and start to make, you know, have those conversations and make things happen. I think the TGA is a little bit more tricky. Yes, I agree, they need to be in the conversation, and perhaps we can invite them along to, you know, to come and hear what we've got to say and answer the questions that we've got for them.
Definitely. Okay, thanks, Joanne.
So if there's no other responses, Moira, did you have a response to Katrina's question, or?
No, I'm fine. I just wanted to see if there are any more questions, that's all.
So we've actually got one. So we've shared some great case studies today of 3D printed plastic parts. Do you have any printing metal for surgical applications examples or case studies you could share today?
Joanne, I don't, but Joanne, do you have any metal printed case studies?
Not Alfredo's saying that animatronics have some examples. I'm sure they're out there. We need to gather that information.
So maybe if there are any participants on the call today who have some case studies that they could share around these printed metal, if you could share that in the chat session, send that through to us by email.
If you wanted to talk a bit about bone implant project, maybe in relation to that, because maybe it's the future, but it's still a good case.
Yeah, for sure. So there's probably a couple of people on the call as well, actually, who are part of the project. So we UTS are working with an innovative manufacturing CRC, which really explores that just-in-time patient-specific bone tumor implants, and really looking at how we can look at point-of-care manufacturing of implants, not only through the additive manufacturing process, but how we design, automate, and actually insert the implant through that whole procedure. And that's a project that's really looking at that just-in-time process. So I think it's an excellent opportunity to look at an Australian first and potentially a world first in what we're doing in that project. And I think as that project sort of comes to an end in 12 months or so, as its first iteration, Emmanuel, there's going to be really lots of learnings that will come out of that, for not only from a regulatory perspective and working with the TGA and how companies in Australia can really look at that example to commercialise these opportunities, but also how we engage with the health sector and bring in clinical leads. So there's several opportunities that we can take from that learning from that project.
And just to clarify, that would be metal, but it underlined a lot of the case really crystallized a lot of the issues or the thing to work on for the future that you have shown in the report in terms of integration, systemic approach, capabilities that are not necessarily the core printing, but what comes around the printing. So I think it really manifested very strongly in that case.
Yeah.
So I think maybe we can invite Alfredo to speak. Alfredo, would you like?
Hi, how are you? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Yeah, so I give the other people attending the call a bit of background on myself. I used to be with MTP Connect when Katrina and UTS and Emmanuel started this whole sort of process of engaging with all the stakeholders in the space to talk about 3D printing of implants and personalized implants and things like that. I think that the point I wanted to make, and I'm really adamant about this, is that regulation is really not the biggest problem that everybody thinks it is. I think the TGA has a pretty good handle on what needs to be done to really open up the sort of 3D printing in medicine sort of space. The issue is not regulation. The issue is, how do companies make money out of this? Anatomics doesn't get any reimbursement, or the people that are going to need the implants from Anatomics, they don't get any money from government. They have to pay for this out of their own pockets. So if Anatomics has to make a one-off solution for patient one that is going to cost $100,000, the patient has to pay $100,000. That's a big problem, because they don't have the scale to do 40, 50, 60 of these every month, right? So the issue is reimbursement. If there's a path for reimbursement, all the other things fall into play, because you're going to have increasing demand from the market. Therefore, you can employ more people, you can train more people, you can do a whole bunch of other things. Without the reimbursement being sorted, none of this is going to happen.
Yeah, thank you for that, Alfredo. I think one of the other things, points that I would like to raise, and I don't know if anyone there has come across this, but certainly the procurement processes within the health system. So we find that's actually quite complicated, because you have the procurement people negotiating the contracts, you've got the clinicians or the surgeons making decisions about what products they're going to buy, and then you've got, you know, the accounting people that pay for it. And so there's not really an alignment about that. So finding it quite difficult to get these innovative products into the hospital or to the health supply chain through the procurement process. I don't know if anyone's had any experiences around that.
I think, Moira, it's about awareness throughout the industry. If you look into other countries like US or some European countries, where you will see huge application of surgical and medical devices using 3D printed products. So it's about a scale, it's about awareness. Whenever you have mass awareness among the clinicians, then you will have more demand, and that will help to cover the investment that Roberto told about investment. So yes, awareness is very important. Education, evidences, business cases that our findings has shown. Business cases are important, evidences are important, skills are important. So those things will come up whenever you have more demand from the consumer side. So that's really important.
Okay, thanks for that, Maruf. I think unless there's any other questions, we've taken up enough of everyone's time. We'd like to thank everyone for attending. And I think Katie's put the link to the report there. And again, if anyone's got any questions, we'll send a follow-up email, which you can either send more questions or feel free to put any comments about the presentation or about the topic on there. So thank you again for attending, and have a good day.